Welcome to Plotting About, writers talking to writers, going wherever the alcohol, algorithm, or action takes them. Your host, Andrew Rubin, a screenwriter, card-carrying member of the Writers Guild of America, co-founder of the education platform Symptom Media, and author of Hell or High Winter, book one in the Holy Trilogy series. Well, gosh golly darn it. He pulled up a stool to sit down with J. Todd Scott, a native Kentuckian and retired federal law enforcement agent with 30 years of experience. He was a finalist for the 2024 International Thriller Writers Award for Best Paperback Original and is the critically acclaimed author of 7 crime, suspense, and thriller novels. He is also a film and TV producer and screenwriter, most recently for the Paramount Plus series Lawman, Bass Reeves, and the upcoming series Dutton Ranch. Take it away, gentlemen.
You've gone from DEA agent to novelist to screenwriter.
Yep.
Which was the hardest? which was the hardest one to do?
It's interesting because clearly, writing for Hollywood or writing a novel, it doesn't quite have the same level of stress that having someone put a gun in your face does. Doing Undercover, or getting in a car chase, or all the sort of stuff that I did as a federal agent. But I think it's also fair to say that the creative space, working either on a novel or working in Hollywood, that is really stressful too in its own way. There's a lot at stake. There's careers at stake. There's money at stake. There's everything. And so they're quite different, but they do share some similarities. And, it's interesting. I always think that really good storytellers, that cops make really good storytellers and because they sit around all the time. And what do? They bullshit. They tell stories. And oftentimes those stories get better in the retelling. I mean, that's how it works. So, I think there's a lot of similarities in storytelling between what I did as a federal agent and what I do now as a writer. But they're both unique and they both have their own, stresses. That's for sure.
Yeah, I guess going back, like what did you do as a DEA agent? Just kind of going back to that part of your career, because I didn't get to talk to you about like what that entailed.
Yeah, well, I started as a street level agent back in the early 90s. I started as an agent shortly after I graduated from college. I decided in college I wanted to do federal law enforcement. I'd grown up on Miami Vice and Lethal Weapon and all that sort of stuff. I'd like to say that I had some great desire to serve my fellow man or to be a civil servant. But the fact is I wanted to do something cool. And, wearing a shoulder holster and driving a car fast and having a mullet, that all seemed cool to me back then. And so I was fortunate enough to, not long after I graduated college, was able to make my way into the DEA and got sent out to LA as a brand new street agent in the early 90s and did everything that a street agent does. I was buying dope and doing undercover and running around cars and just doing the sort of criminal investigations that DEA did then and still does now. And I had basically a 30-year career. Most of my adult life was taken up by being a federal agent. And that means I moved 10 times. I lived overseas. I had different aliases. I drove a bunch of different cars. I think most of my neighbors and all the places I lived probably thought I was a drug dealer, right? That's just kind of the lifestyle. It really is. I mean, when you're a federal agent like that, or a cop, or anything in one of those kind of unique professions, it's not just a profession. It's a lifestyle. It's who you are, and you work 24/7, or you can. And I did for a very long time, but I had a very traditional route as an agent. I wasn't a traditional agent in the sense that I had never done police work before. I didn't come from the military, which a lot of agents do. I mean, I came out of college and wanted to be an agent and was. But my career, once I got on the job and got my badge and gun, was traditional. I worked on the street and I worked on the border and I worked overseas and I did big offices and small offices. And I did everything that you could do as a federal agent over the 30 years that I did it, and had a tremendous career. I loved it. It's a difficult career, a difficult lifestyle. It takes a toll on family and everything, but I don't think I would have done anything else over that time.
Well, did you get the mullet?
I did have the mullet. I had the mullet even before DEA, but I 100% had the mullet. When I started out in Los Angeles in there in the early 90s, I thought I would be driving like a Ferrari or live on a boat, kind of like Sonny Crockett, and have the mullet and all that. And so I had the mullet, and I had the shoulder holster, which no one really wears those anymore, but back then they did.
You didn't want to get the houseboat in Marina Del Rey then? You
Oh,
could
I
have just
absolutely wanted the
completed the
houseboat.
package.
Yes, absolutely wanted it. And so, but my first G car, my first undercover car, was a Ford Aerostar van. It was about the least cool, the least sexy undercover vehicle that you could imagine. And it would stall out whenever I kind of idled in it. So it was a really crappy car. I looked good in it. I thought I looked good in it, but man, it definitely undercut my image of what a fast and furious kind of special agent would be. And you starting out when I did, it's funny. I was having this conversation with someone the other day. We didn't have cell phones, and so I got out to Los Angeles, and I had to get around by a Thomas guy. You didn't have GPS, you didn't have cell phones. We worked off of pagers, and I would drive around with a ton of quarters in my center console, right, to use payphone. Something my kids have no idea when I talk about, hey, I had to use a payphone. It was just a different time, right, a different way to do law enforcement versus by the time I retired, where you had all of the technology, all of the stuff. I'm not sure exactly how we arrested anyone back then. It seems like, but it was definitely an experience for a young guy coming from the Midwest or East like I did, to go out to Los Angeles. I'd never been in a city that big, and to get dropped in the middle of it, and to have them give me a badge and a gun and an old van and say go make dope cases. It's a hell of a
Yeah.
way to start a career.
Yeah, and to navigate also the whole urban life and urban crime as well, having not been out here, it must have been an entirely new cultural experience. Like you had to learn probably a whole nother language.
Oh yeah, everything was new. Everything was new to me, and I think it was great that I was so green and so stupid because I enjoyed all of it. Right, like I had to do surveillance in a van one time, and they just kind of parked this van in this parking lot, and I was the new agent, so they're like, all right, you're going to sit in this van and you're going to take pictures out this window. And I'm like, well, how long am I going to sit there? And they say, until we tell you you're done. And I sat there for hours taking pictures, and in this van with the engine turned off, right? Because it's supposed to be kind of a van in a parking lot. And I stripped down to my underwear, right? I'm pissing in a bottle, stripped down to my underwear because it's so hot sitting in a LA parking lot in this van, taking pictures through the windows. But I thought it was the best job on the planet. Like they could have left me there weeks, and I probably would have still loved it. But it's a great way to start my career.
I'm seeing like so many good scenes and details that you could be working in that would be a whole different side to police work, or at least a high-speed pursuit with a bunch of quarters flying around the van as you're like rounding those turns.
Yeah, that's right. I've been in two high-speed pursuits. I've wrecked a couple of vehicles during those pursuits, and they are just as exciting in real life as they look like on TV or film. But I was very fortunate to start DEA when I did, at the age I did, to have the experiences that I did. I loved every minute of it, and probably would still be doing it if we didn't have a mandatory retirement age, which is what I was pushing up against when I finally did retire.
No. Man, I have so many questions. It's crazy. And it's really just to say it's very funny how you came full circle, that you started by watching TV
Mhm.
of these detective shows, and now then you're writing on them at the other end of this, and
Yeah, it's
starting in
great.
LA and then like back in LA on the TV side. It's really funny how life just kind of has a sense of
No, it's crazy. I mean, I grew up on Hill Street Blues and Homicide: Life on the Streets and Miami Vice and all of those sorts of things. And I didn't appreciate all that as much when I was living out there as an agent. But then to come back like I did last year, and then be on the full, writer side of it, the full Hollywood side of it, and go back out. Like my old apartment I lived in when I was a brand new agent is still out there, right? It's still in Playa del Rey, and to go out there and see it, and to think, man, 30 some odd years ago, I was here living a completely different life, doing a completely different thing, and now I'm back again.
This almost feels like a book in itself. I don't know.
It Yeah. I've
Di-
often asked why I don't write a book about my own life. I don't find myself very interesting, but I've worked with a lot of interesting people, and so all of that gets put into the books that I have written. But you
which
know,
I definitely want to ask you about all that stuff, but I'm also so curious because I mean, I've met people that have been involved in high speed pursuits,
Mhm.
um, not on the other side that's going to go to jail at the end
Right.
of the, but from the law enforcement side. But then you're also perspective as a writer and also and film and prose novels and then in television. What do the writers get wrong about it from the experience of you being in them, or like what always drives you nuts? Like, oh my God, that is not how it goes. I mean, aside from just driving through panes of glass and chicken coops and for some reason there's always a stall of fruit and vegetables that the car has to go through. But
Right,
like
and
what?
I have not done that. I've been up on sidewalks, and I've seen other vehicles wrecked during high speed chases. I've seen the vans roll down the roads as they're being chased. I think and of course it's hard to capture on film, right? But I think what you miss, and what's almost maybe impossible to convey, is just how scared you are during a lot of it. I mean, you're driving fast, and that's exciting, but you really are um, putting yourself and other people in danger, and that's why you don't do it that much and shouldn't do it that much. There's very little reason to chase somebody, back then or now. But sometimes it happens, but it's terrifying. You don't want to hurt somebody, and a car is basically a big missile at that speed. And when you see those sort of stunts being filmed, you see how everything is precise and everything's measured down to the moment. Everything is practiced. It looks chaotic, but it isn't at all. But in real life, it's chaotic as hell, and you're scared shitless during most of it, because you don't want to hurt anybody. As bad as you might want to catch that guy, you sure don't want to hurt anybody either, and you prefer not to hurt yourself. Um, so it's always one of those things that when you're done, on TV and film, everybody's high fiving each other, and they go to the bar or whatever. In real life, you're taking deep breaths, being, "Thank God I didn't hurt somebody." Right? Thank God I didn't hurt somebody. And now I got a shit ton of paperwork to do.
That's why I never bought 24. I mean, a great show and I loved it and I watched it, but I
Right.
mean, like also like a show that's set in real time in Los Angeles, like half that show should just be traffic. And like one episode is a bathroom break. Um, so like with all that stuff, I'm always so curious, like because you've written, and maybe you should talk about the different types of thriller novels you've written and then now in television. Is there like one specific skill or like what was the thing that surprised you didn't think would translate or be as useful from all of that experience into writing? Um, because I mean, I think there's the obvious ones, which is like you probably have so many stories you probably could cram an entire bookshelf just filled with the things that you did
Hmm.
and the skills that you learned.
Well, I mean, I think what uh, again, and this gets glossed over a lot in TV and film, but there's a tremendous amount of paperwork. I mean, particularly when you're a federal agent, you're called a federal agent, called a special agent. Well, oftentimes as a shorthand, we say we're cops, but we're not really. I mean, local cops, police officers do something quite a bit different day in, day out than I did. Really, when you're a federal agent, FBI, DEA, or whatever, you're a criminal investigator. That's actually what it says underneath all that other verbiage on your credentials. And so you're investigating crimes, and that does take a tremendous amount of patience, and a tremendous amount of writing, of documentation. I mean, you're only as good as the reports that you've written because you're going to testify on the stand to them, right? I mean, so there's an amazing amount of paperwork and necessary paperwork, right? I mean, if you didn't record it properly, if you didn't put it down, if it couldn't be corroborated, then it didn't happen. So there's a lot of reporting that you do. And a lot of those reports are surveillance or your undercover reports, and you do undercover. And that's a narrative. I mean, what you're really doing is telling a story, and you have to tell it in a way that a prosecutor can understand it, and that ultimately maybe a jury can understand it. So it's not creative writing because you're telling the truth, but you have to be able to put these events, which can be fast and which can be very fluid, and you have to be able to report that and put that in a report that you can then testify to and testify about. And so that ability to kind of focus, write, and then tell a story in an interesting, cogent way actually does translate pretty well. And you don't see that in TV. You don't see them sitting around writing reports other than complain about it. But that's the nature of what you do. That's how you make an investigation. That's how you prosecute ultimately a crime.
That's kind of why lawyers make such good writers, or always, or like secretly all want to become writers, because that's interesting, yeah, because you really have to have the clarity involved, the clarity in mind when you're writing all those reports because of everything they have to do downstream. So, and that clarity, I feel like that's always something I'm having to do in my writing, which is making sure, can people understand it? Where are people even just spatially in that sort of sense?
Right.
And I'm sure you
And
must
so
have a very
Right. And so if you're sitting around doing a surveillance report and you're writing what you saw, that is what you saw. And so where you saw people and what was going on and the times, and you're taking that in notes, right? So you have to be a good note taker and you have to be observant, right? And then you have to take those notes and then write a report that everyone else is gonna read. And it needs to be the truth, right? It can't be embellished. It can't be your what you wished happened. It has to be what in fact did happen. But that still requires you to put it in a kind of narrative, intelligent way for other people to read.
So did the other people that you work with were like, oh man, we always know JT was going to be a writer, like, because we read his reports? Did you like really like, oh yeah, the guy had a mole and then this birthmark and he walked with a limp that said that or did you really get away from the sort of editorializing in that way? Or
Well, I mean, you have to tell the truth, but you do want to make it readable, right? I mean, you do want to make it, I don't want to say the word interesting, but, because again, you don't want to editorialize, right? You basically reciting what happened, but you want to do it in a way that makes sense and that is interesting enough because people have to sit there and read it. So, my ability was that I was, observant and I could write and I could put it together pretty fast, right? I mean, writing is a skill. Storytelling is an art, right? Writing is a craft which you can get better at. But and so I was able to write fast and write what happened fast, and that's always a good ability to have when you're running a lot of cases and you got to come back, you got to write your reports and get back out on the street. I didn't spend a lot of time agonizing over that. And there were some great agents who struggled with that, as most, a lot of people struggle with actual writing, just putting their thoughts down. And, that would be miserable for some of those guys. The street stuff they were great at and everything else, but actually putting that report together, right, was
so
tough.
then it must so then it must have been really fun. Like I'm so curious, like when was the moment? Did you always want to be a writer, or was that something that you just kind of came about? And then there's that moment when you went from, because I found this with going with, and you did the opposite route, but for me going from screenwriting to novel writing, like, oh wow, I can explore all the internal monologues that screenwriting denies your creativity to implement because it just has to be a blueprint. But for you, it's like you went from these very cut and dry reports that were probably very engaging and useful down the road to all the legal teams, but then like suddenly you get to actually put what they're thinking into the reports, like
Right.
instead of just writing down the actions and the details. I don't know,
Right. Yeah,
is
and
that
then I had to unlearn all of that, putting the thinking in when I started screenwriting,
that's
right?
right.
Um,
You
you
went
know,
back to the case reports.
With back to the case reports, I think I always loved writing. I always thought about being a writer. And for me, it was always being a novelist. Like that's kind of what I imagined when I was a kid. And when I, up through high school and then into college, I was always writing stories and envisioned that maybe that's what I would do one day. And I took quite a few creative writing classes through college and worked on a literary magazine and, contemplated kind of going on and getting a master's in creative writing and stuff like that. And I admittedly got a little gutless about it. I just thought maybe there's just no career here, there's no livelihood here. Like I just couldn't see a path forward. I mean, I was writing stories and turning them in, and what you did back then, mailed them off, right? Wait for the rejection letters, and it just felt like, I mean, this is really what I'm going to do with my life. And I got good feedback, but you're getting good, rejections. And my other interest at that time, as I was finishing up college, became this kind of law enforcement thing. And I was working room service at a hotel near my college campus, and it was a big time hotel, it was a 5-star kind of resort right outside DC, and it was sort of a hotel that a lot of dignitaries and people went through. And so it's silly to say, but I was doing room service, kind of making extra money during college, and I got to meet a lot of Secret Service guys because they're in these rooms watching all these dignitaries, and I'm bringing them club sandwiches and whatever. And there's all these guys back then with the big mustaches, and they're smoking, and they got the shoulder holsters, right? And it was just, you're hanging out because I'm just bringing them food and kind of bullshit with them. You're meeting these guys, and I decided I didn't want to be a Secret Service agent necessarily, but I'm like, okay, this is something maybe I could do. And they were funny, and they were telling stories, and they were the typical hard-bitten, jaded, cynical cop guys that have now become kind of a trope, right? But this is what these guys were, back then. And so, I had this first love for writing, and then the second love of kind of being a cop or an agent or whatnot. And I put the writing aside to do the latter. And but I always loved stories. And when I was on surveillance in my car, I was that guy who had, we didn't have Kindles back then, so I always had like a stack of paperback books or library books, right? Because if you're not immediately staring at something, a lot of times you could just go park under a tree or something and read for a few minutes. So I was always reading, and occasionally I would put pen to paper, but I just didn't take it seriously for many, many, many years. And then it finally kind of decided to do that. And it was, an interesting, again, I'd like to say all this was thought out. None of it was. I just kind of fumbled forward. But through my career path, I had to do a stint in our headquarters, our DEA headquarters. When you start to promote up, it's just a thing you have to do. And I ended up being sent to our Congressional and Public Affairs section. And on a coin toss, basically, I ended up on the public affairs side. And I didn't know anything about public affairs or media, but that's kind of where I had to spend some time. That's the way to professionalize you, right? You go from the street, now they put you in a suit, and you're, talking to people. And one of the things I did on the public affairs side was I talked with writers and filmmakers who were doing DEA projects. And I was the throwdown agent, right? I was the guy that they would say, hey, go talk to this guy. He'll tell you about our job and how we do it. And I got to talk to some novelists and talk to some filmmakers. And I was telling them just stories. I was just saying, hey, we did this, we did that, we wrecked this car, and we chased this guy, and we did these things. And somebody said, hey, you know what? You're probably pretty good at this thing. Have you ever thought about writing yourself? I said, well, I did as a kid, many years ago. I haven't in a while, but that stuck with me. And I said, well, if I'm going to ever try it, I'm approaching 40, I better do it now. And that's when I picked up the pen and started writing again.
Yeah. This just came out of what you were talking about. So I've got like all these other things I was going to ask, but like the funny idea that they were the tropes. So now that you're as a writer, if the tropes are true, do you try to avoid them, or you just go into them?
No, I think you lean into them sometimes. I mean, look, these stories are successful because they work, right? They do. And so I don't want to denigrate them. They work. And a jaded, cynical cop or agent or guy in the military, I mean, that's true. It's hard to do that sort of career or life for as long as some guys do it and not get a certain amount of jaded or cynicism. So, no, I think that's fair. Um, and their expectations. And I think that at some level, it's worthwhile to meet audience expectations. Particularly given the genre that you're working in or something else. So, um, you know, a trope is a trope because it's true at some level.
Yeah, I
And
heard that
so,
from that. There was this really great advice that now I'm blanking on who it was. Um, I'll have to remember it later, but it was the idea of like cliches are a cliche for a reason. It's not your job isn't to avoid them; it's to do it in a way that's new and
right.
interesting.
Yeah.
Which is good because it kind of liberates you from the fact of always trying to avoid traps and stepping into things that have been done before, which is impossible. Um,
Yeah. I mean, it's very tough to reinvent the wheel, from a storytelling standpoint, right? Births and deaths, right? I mean, what happens in between, that's really every story. So, I think it's the quality of truth that you bring to a story. It's the quality of recognition that people can see in the stories that ultimately matters. And they'll forgive cliches or tropes or anything else if they feel that it's true.
you write thrillers and these mysteries, and you spent one half of your career solving them. I guess is that fair to say solving it? Like,
Well, I mean, you're
or
not.
crap?
Yeah, I mean, you're putting an
Yeah,
investigation together. I'm trying to prove a crime occurred, and I'm trying to prove that you did it. So it's
yeah,
not like solving a murder mystery per se, but you're still solving a crime, and a lot of
yeah.
the aspects of it are the same.
So then, like, when you are going to construct one that's fictional, which is the interesting, so then because you're coming at it from the law enforcement side in real life, so like somebody did something independent of you, they're doing something bad, and you're going to stop it, and you've got to investigate it and go after it. But then on the writing side, we're having to do both ends, but you
Right.
have to create something that's compelling enough to give your character enough things to do and mysteries to solve. And I'm saying mysteries to solve sort of generally
Yeah.
broadly, since it's not actually sometimes always a mystery. But like, how does that? Is that something that it's this is me stumbling about for the question, but it's kind of an interesting thing where you're suddenly putting on another hat where you're creating the crime for then somebody else to solve. So then do you take, or what do you take from the real world that makes those crimes, like, do you say like, oh, I pull like for the most interesting things, or what's the construction to make a thriller as
Well,
thrilling as possible?
well, it's different whether you're talking about a thriller or kind of a mystery or suspense or whatnot. I mean, procedurals, right, which are really the kind of nuts and bolts of solving a crime. Um, and it has driven my agents a little batty at times because I always talk about what a bad crime writer I am, because at the end of the day, the crime to me is the least interesting part of anything of the books that I write. There's crimes in them, but the kills of a serial killer or the drug dealing of a drug dealer, right? To some extent, that's not very interesting. I was always fascinated by the collateral damage of those activities. So it's kind of what happens after the crime, after the bullets left the gun and the expended rounds on the ground. So, um, you know, so the what I bring to my stories is how it's done to the extent that you care how it's done, right? Like, how you can trace phones and listen in on wires and all those kind of procedural things. I mean, those are real in my books because I've done those things, or I've worked with people who've done all those things, right? But I tend not to dwell on them. None of my crime books are procedurals in the strictest sense. Oftentimes everyone knows who did it, the reader included, right? It's about how everyone deals with it after it's done. Um, and I think that's more true to life. Most of the cases that I investigated, I knew who the bad guy was. I had to prove it, but I knew who they were. But when you spend a time putting a case together on somebody, what you find is that Yes, they're criminals, but they're not criminals every moment of every day. People are surprisingly mundane in a lot of respects. When they're not drug dealing, they're hanging out with their family or their spouses or their girlfriends, right? Or or their mistresses, right? They're taking their kids to ball games. When you spend months, or if not years, sometimes tracking somebody, following somebody, putting the pieces of their lives together and their criminal activity together, you also realize that there's a lot of their life that isn't criminal at all. And so, that is interesting too. It's all part of the story. And that ends up getting put in my books and my stories. At least I hope so.
No. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like when you're building a character, you can't just have them twirling. If they're just the crime, then they're not interesting. So
Right.
they have to, you know, as they like the bad guy doesn't ever think he's the bad guy,
No, no. I mean,
which
and
is which is why
it,
Breaking Bad was so brilliant that
yeah,
you watched him turn into that, and so you were there with him as those small micro decisions were made, but then the whole life he lived outside of it too was just as profound.
yeah. So, but
Um,
well, and I will say some bad guys do know they're bad. They just don't care, right? And, they figure that's the hand that they're dealt, and that's what they're going to play. And those people, I met them in real life on the job, and I write about them as well. I mean, people's choices, good or bad, are fascinating to me, and then the justification for those choices is fascinating to me, and that's what goes into a lot of what I've written from the novel side. And you were asking about it. My first four novels were really kind of hard crime. Uh, They touched on DEA stuff. They weren't about me or my career, but they touched on DEA stuff. And the first three were kind of a border crime trilogy set in Texas. My fourth book was about kind of the opioid epidemic. It was set in Kentucky actually before I moved back home here. And it's about kind of a crime family falling apart in the middle of the opioid epidemic. But then my last three books have been a little more suspense, thriller, less pure crime, somewhat a little speculative too, as it kind of broadened into other interests.
and I also, I mean, I guess getting into a little bit on the technical side and the writing too. I mean, I love a good cold opening, and Flock has a brilliant one. Like, so how much? I guess what do you put into your openings, and like, how do you find it? Because, I mean, that one was sort of, at least from my, I'm reading it now, and it was kind of self-evident. It was, you have a crime and someone's going to go after, I don't know how much you want to be given away of the book, but you start off with this, what becomes the mystery of it, and from that point of view. But like, did you know that's where you're going to go? Or like when you're starting a new book, how do you find the most compelling way in?
Yeah, usually, well, unlike my screenwriting, and of course you know this from all your screenwriting, my screenplays tend to be, very heavily outlined and all of that, particularly on the TV stuff that I've done. You're going through multiple iterations of the outline before you go to page on the script. But my novels tend not to be outlined at all. I have characters in my head that interest me, and then I usually have an opening image or some kind of hook that that has grabbed me, and then I may have a rough idea of where it's gonna land, but I generally have no idea what's going to happen in the middle of the book. And so it's not a very efficient way to write a 300 plus page novel at all. Um, but it's the way that I like to do it because I like that kind of exploration. And that means that I go down rabbit holes and get lost in other stuff. But I kind of like that, and the book grows organically. So a book like The Flock, I had these characters. I had long wanted to do a book about cults, but I just didn't want to write kind of a typical A B narrative, that most you would be familiar with, and most probably people watching this would be familiar with. I wanted to do something a little bit different, but I definitely had this image of this character, and some of the other characters, the ancillary characters, and I had very much kind of the opening in my head and built out from there. The other thing about the flock specifically, that I wanted to do is I wanted to do an epistolary book in the sense that as you get through it, you see that a lot of it is made up of police reports and newspaper articles and magazine articles, all of which kind of reflect people's understanding of this cult throughout its existence. And some of those things are at odds, right? Like, and that was kind of what the book was about, this faith and belief and what do you believe in things, and, and so I knew I wanted to write a book with all that kind of material in it, and I had these characters that I liked, and then I just kind of shook them together like Yahtzee, and then figured it out from there.
It's funny because I was asking of how you construct your novels based on how you did your work, and it was the opposite experience. But it's actually you're doing the exact same thing you were doing in your job with your books. You're solving them as you go.
So yeah,
maybe
I solved them.
is that fair to say?
No, I think that's a great way to put it. I'm solving it. There's a mystery. Like I know the hint of the book, right? And I know where I want to go, but there's a mystery of exactly how I'm going to get there. And I enjoy kind of figuring it out. Again, it's not efficient, and sometimes you sit down and you're staring at the screen and I have no idea what's going to happen next. Uh, my book after the flock, Call the Dark, um, ends up these characters on this mountain, and I was working a little bit on the Bass Reeves show at that time. I was trying to finish Call the Dark. I had something else I was working on. Plus, I was still a full-time agent, and I was really kind of burning the candle at both ends. And this book had to be turned in. I was under contract for it. And I've never really been under pressure before. It was the first time I'd ever was running late on a book, and I was just kind of juggling, unfortunately, too much. And there's a moment in that book where these characters are stuck on this mountain, and I felt like I was stuck on that mountain. I never really had that happen on a book, but I was trapped like for 3 weeks. I had no idea what to do next or how to get there, and my characters are stuck there. I was stuck there, and I'm like, I'm just never getting off this mountain. Like I'm never finishing this book. And I did something which I generally don't do, but I kind of finally felt my backed into a corner, and I wrote a scene that had nothing to do with kind of that moment and stuff. It wouldn't have been the next logical scene, right? But I wrote a scene between two characters that I thought I would probably end up writing, but it wasn't at that moment. But that scene I wrote, which was a quiet scene, and it was one guy kind of talking another woman off of a problem that she was having, kind of unlocked me for whatever reason. And that scene verbatim ended up in the book at the appropriate place, but it allowed me to go back to where everyone was stuck on this mountain in this snowstorm and allow me to move ahead. Don't know why it worked. I'm glad I hit on it when I did, but every book for me is kind of a different experience. I generally have a process, but it's a little bit different, and that is what worked on that. So
Yeah, it's those moments always feel the best, but it's torture getting to them.
yeah.
Like you just hope you're going to get to it at some point, that the break will happen. Because I've just had a couple of those recently where I was stuck on one chapter for like 2 months, and it was torture. And I thought I'd never get through it, and I'd been dreading it for a while. Yeah, and it's funny, and then different ways help unblock it. That's a cool kind of going outside the chapter. I just keep trying to force my way through it, which is probably not the healthiest. But
Well, and I had success forcing my way through it before, and I feel like a dummy. It took me 3 weeks to figure out, Nate. Well, try something different, right? And so I did, and just to write something that wasn't in the moment, that wasn't in that scene, that I wasn't beating my head against, kind of got the gears turning again.
and that's what freaks me out though about the pantsers and the plotters, to have to use that expression, because coming from screenwriting, it's like all outline. So that's how I learned, like extremely, like with legal notepads
Hmm.
by hand. It was like extremely rigid the way I was taught to do it, and then it has really served me well, and I still use it. So even with the books, I use it, and the idea of not having an outline would freak me out writing a book. I mean,
Well,
how do you not know, like, oh shit, I've just reached a corner and now I've got to totally scrap this? Like, because I would think at some point, if you don't know where your book is going and you've not outlined it and you hit one of those roadblocks, or you realize it's taken you off the thread to allow you to finish the book, or do
well,
you?
sometimes you find your instincts took you there for a reason, right? And then it forces you to kind of interrogate, all right, why am I writing this? And so I was a pantser in the sense that I just kind of started and went. But I did kind of borrow, and this was before I started screenwriting. I cribbed an idea from screenwriting, which was like the note cards, right? I didn't do any of that before I started writing, but as I was putting a novel together, I would make note cards for the chapters I had already written, color coding them by like point of view or whatever, right? And so every house that I moved into, my wife would make a big cork board on one of the walls, right? And so I would kind of like build the outline behind me. So that way, once I got the first draft done, I could go back and look at it, much like screenwriters do. I have a ton of color coded note cards, right? And, for instance, and I could say, well, I thought my main character was orange, but why does he have fewer note cards than the purple guy? Right? And the purple guy was a secondary character. So why did I do right? I mean, because then it's just math, right? As you well know, it's structure, it's screenplay, math. And I could just add up my cards across my thing and say, well, I've got far more of this guy than I got of somebody else. He clearly isn't my main character, or I screwed up somewhere. So I built the outline kind of ex post or after the fact, but then was able to use that cards and that quote unquote outline to then start rebuilding the book on the current drafts. And I could literally move like you do in a writer's room, or in the screenplay thing. I could go start moving those cards around and say, all right, I can move them here, move there, and just work the math of the story out kind of after I had all the pieces on the table in front of me.
It's funny. That's the one thing I've never been able to adopt. I write it all out, and I've only once ever used note cards because the plot was so tricky that I had to lay it out to be able to maneuver things around because of the sequential nature of it. But I've written so many of them now, the screenplay wise, that like I get the sense of like, oh, I'm too long without the main character, and I got to get back to it. So it's funny because you kind of get that sense just because in scripts you so have to be on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
and your natural narrative instincts, like like you get that sixth sense of, all right, I need to go back to the A story or B story or whatever it is. But the couple of writers' rooms experience I have, the showrunner came up very traditionally. I've come to understand. So it is note cards on the board, right? And you are putting them out, colored note cards for the storylines or characters or whatever, however he does it, right? And the big note cards, right? And the staff writers up there writing on the note cards, and you're putting them up on the board and you're moving them around. And every episode was constructed that way. And I did that kind of on my own on my books, but I kind of learned it from looking at something online or figured it out. And then so I actually was prepared for that part when I actually sat in the writer's room, like, oh yeah, I recognize this. I just do it after the fact. I do it after I write everything. But it
not
was very traditional that way.
not to disparage other writers, and then I'm using a big but. It's funny when I use Zoom with a bunch of writers, and a lot of times writers love to use that as their backgrounds. So they must, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it's like they want you to know that they've got all the note cards behind
They
them.
all the note cards up there.
Yeah. And so I've been on so many, especially during the pandemic when all you could do was Zoom people. And it's like, you'd be like, what are you working on? And they could just easily do that because I think they really wanted you to see
Well, yeah, I
the
found in the
visual
writer's room that
presentation.
the best way I don't have very good penmanship, and you want people who are carding, right, to be good at that. And so somebody would always say, all right, JT or Todd, you get up there and card. And the minute they saw my handwriting, they're like, please sit down. We don't need to see that, because no one could figure out what the hell I was writing, right?
The most brilliant idea ever birthed in a writer's room, but then no one was able to read it, and
Right,
therefore it
right.
was gone.
Right, and
Um,
I would write like I'd get crooked. I'd write fast to get crooked. And the letters would be all different sizes, and people develop facial tics looking at my cards up there. So I didn't have to do it. I didn't have to do actually much physical carding, but I appreciated why we did it. In putting together the TV series that we did, and I learned a lot going through that process with a bunch of people who had done it for years, and why it allowed them to construct an episode and then a whole series of episodes in a kind of a smart, mostly efficient way.
it's funny when I've done a couple book adaptations, project wise for producers, and when I do that, actually the thing that I do again, because I can't use note cards, it's too frustrating for me process wise. But I outline the books, like so I take the book and I do what you're doing. So I'm trying to figure out the construction of what the author was trying to do, and then that's funny because usually you find a lot of plot holes. But then once I can condense the chapters from a different writer into essentially my version of the note cards, and then I start replotting it around to make it what the movie version needs it to be, and I
Right.
can eliminate, and it's anyways, it's very interesting, the sort of engineering and reverse engineering that happens, and
Yeah,
um,
and I think that when I talk to a lot of aspiring writers, um, one of the things that I tell them to focus on is finding your process. I think the process can change over time. It can be adaptable. It can be flexible. But I think you have to find a process that works for you. Every new book is somewhat like, rediscovering fire. But at least you should start with the same set of sticks you're rubbing together. And so, I find comfort in having a process, as weird as it might be, because I can lean on that as at least to start every book. I kind of know what to expect. I know what works for me. I know, and maybe that process is writing every day. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's whatever. But I think each aspiring writer needs to find their process, and that's part of becoming better and ultimately becoming, a professional writer, is having a process that you feel good about in getting the work done. And it's varied, just talking, look how different we both approach it, and we both get work done. And my process might not work for you. And I think sometimes aspiring writers, they try to just copy somebody else. And then when it doesn't work for them, well, they're like, well, I'm not good at this. And maybe that system didn't work for you. Find a system that does.
yeah, I can't do like this the whatever the story graphs and all those things. It drives me. It just I can't function that way where I'm trying to like map things onto somebody else's book process that they've
Right.
used to sell. Yeah, if people ask me like, do I have a screenwriting book? And I do. I have one, but I use it to prop my couch up so the Roomba doesn't get stuck underneath it.
Right.
So, because that's as beneficial as it gets for me. I don't know. Maybe I'd be more successful on the screen side if I read it, but
Well, and I
uh,
think, that, it's not process per se, but form in a script. I know that I drove myself bananas when I first started writing screenplays. Like, what did a script look like? I didn't know, you know. So I did what everyone did. I look online, and of course nowadays, fortunately, you can find many examples out there. I guess there was one point where it had been difficult, but you can almost find too many examples. And a script is a very individual thing. And if you're directing your own script, well, you're gonna write it one way and have it look a certain way as opposed to somebody else. And a very successful screenwriter might get away with certain things in a script that a new screenwriter, an aspiring screenwriter, or a learning screenwriter, wouldn't be able to do.
yeah,
And so I had all of these examples, and I would print them out. I probably had 6 binders of scripts back behind me, right, just to kind of read, and it became too much, right? And I realized that there are some, there's some fundamentals, but beyond that, there's no right perfect way. There's a lot of really good ways. And so much like finding your process in a novel, I think you have to find your voice and your look on a script, right? Something that you're comfortable with, and find it yourself. And I would, my first initial scripts were like monster scripts, like Frankenstein. I'm like, ooh, I like the way this guy did that, and this guy did that, and this guy did that. And they'd be all over the place. And they didn't really reflect me or my voice or anything else. But I kind of had to go through that till I started to hone down to what I like in a script, how I'm going to write a script. It may not be everybody's best version, but it's my version.
Well, talking about scripts, I have to like geek out on the fact that you're working on Dutton Ranch, or you worked on it. It's wrapped. Um, since I'm a huge Yellowstone fan, I mean, it must have been pretty intimidating though, especially since Taylor Sheridan mostly wrote all of that himself. To then, I mean, he at all. Okay, first I'm gonna back up and just say like, how did you get that amazing coveted spot in a
Uh,
writer's room on the Yellowstone universe? So,
yeah, and I am very, I know how fortunate I am. So I was brought on as kind of a consulting producer for Bass Reeves because I knew the showrunner. He was a fan of my work, or fan of my writing, my novels, and we had long stayed in contact for many years as he kind of waited for me to retire and maybe come actually do this whole Hollywood thing full time. And he gave me a crack to see what a writer's room was like on Bass, gave me an episode to write, which then, got made. And then I got to go to set during some of the filming of Bass and see all of that. And so I kind of got to, do an internship in this is what, this is what working in a writer's room would look like if I decided to do it. And just about the time that I retired, he was chosen to run Dutton Ranch, which is the one of the spinoffs from Yellowstone, the mothership show. The other is Marshall's, which follows Casey Dutton, and then Dutton Ranch follows Rip Wheeler
Beth,
and Beth Dutton. Right. And so he was selected to do that, and he asked if I would want to come join that. And I knew what a honor and a responsibility it was. And, I was fortunate enough to get hired along with, several other writers. It was a real whole writer's room, which again is different than how, Taylor writes most of his stuff. I mean, generally he has, at least the Yellowstone series proper. And Landman and Madison, he writes all of those himself. And
which
he's
is
a
crazy. I don't know how he has time to do that.
and honestly, I don't know how he has time to do it either. His output and the quality of his output, like those two, the synergy of those two things. I mean, to write fast is one thing, to write good is one thing. To be able to do both at the
And
same time
and
is
then
impressive, and then
you
oversee it and produce it and all of that. And and so we knew we had big shoes to fill because he was not, not writing Dutton Ranch, but he definitely had a vested interest in how it turned out. And Chad Feehan, who was the showrunner, kind of had a vision, and that was his vision. I was just brought on to help execute it, but he had a vision that that Taylor and the other folks over there appreciated, and the actors did as well. And so we got in the writers' room to execute it. And I was not. I was the oldest writer in the room, but I was not the most senior writer. We had, most everyone in there had other, significant TV credits or film credits or whatever. So it was as much an opportunity for me to learn as it was for me to showcase what I could do, on the page. And I treated it as that. It's my first full room, and it felt honestly, and I know, in hindsight, it's kind of like playing in the Super Bowl as a rookie quarterback. This is a massive property, a massive show that is going to get millions of viewers, on name alone,
yeah, the
and
ranch that Paramount Plus built.
exactly,
That sits on.
and with a lot of rabid, rightfully so, fans. And Beth and Rip, the our characters, our main characters, um, are and Carter, right? Carter is their kind of adopted son, and he's a very critical part of the show as well. I mean, they're really, really beloved characters. When we got on the show, I really realized it when I saw the fan magazines that had been made about Beth, right? She's on the cover of all these things, so
That
we
was
knew what we were up against when we were there writing it.
Yeah, that was actually it's funny because or not funny, but like I mean, it must have been a lot of pressure. I certain characters you're always like these are so much fun to watch and they would be so much fun to write. Like I always think Beth Dutton is the type of character I want to so badly drop into a script and be writing it as like Tyrion Lannister or something like that. Because they're just so sharp and the most fun to write are the smartest characters. But I mean, how did you obviously you've probably now been writing Beth Dutton dialogue as you did this season on the show. So
Well,
did it feel
I would argue that Kelly Riley does great Beth Dutton dialogue. I mean, one of the advantages of w- working on a show that has this kind of legacy in the lore and actors like Kelly and Riley and Cole Hauser who have inhabited these characters for so long. I mean, they have a vested interest in these stories as well. And so, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, can they be like an active barometer for like with you going, this doesn't sound
Oh,
like one of my lines, especially
oh
since
yeah.
it was all Taylor Sheridan before.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think we were all cognizant, like none of us are going to write like Taylor. None of us are going to sound like Taylor Sheridan. Um, but we want it to be true to at least the rhythm and the sound, the world, right? We want to be true to the world. And so I have, in my limited screenwriting time, have always felt like this. I'm writing the words on the page, but the actors are saying them. And I don't really care if an actor says my word, right? I just want them to say the emotion or the reality or the story, like where we're trying to go, right? And so if they don't like, the happy glad changes or where they want pauses or where they want beats or they can change any of it really, right? As long as we just kind of get to where we're all trying to go. Because particularly on a TV series, this scene sets up the next scene and sets up the next scene. So I was never precious, have never been precious about my words. I could
Yeah.
care less. And particularly characters actors who inhabited those characters as long as they did, if their version, their words, which they have said for years now, is better than mine, right? Is what they feel more comfortable and natural saying. I say have at it, right? I'm just giving you a template, right? I'm giving you a kind of go by, right? Of the story and where we're trying to get. But I want you as an actor now having seen actors rehearse and practice and say these lines and these scenes over and over again. Like I want you to feel comfortable saying the words. And if that means changing them, like I as a writer personally do not care. And I've been very fortunate to work with great actors on these shows and see them work too. And so there was, in terms of on scripts, there was no hills I was going to die on as a writer, right? I'm just trying to get the best story, and particularly as one of many writers on a show like this, you're really trying to get the best story that the showrunner and the network and the studio and everyone want. So it was a daunting experience, but for many reasons, because you had fans and you had actors and you had Taylor Sheridan, but it was also a tremendous learning experience for me. And I know that all of us, to a person, as the writers, tried to be as collaborative and generous with the actors as they were with us, as we were trying to steer this massive, massive show.
Did you get to take it in terms of the plot for the season? Was there a lot of sign-offs? Did you have to take it in a direction that they wanted it, or did you really just have free reign for where you and the room and the showrunner was going to go with the
No, I
storytelling?
think there was, throughout as you build out a show this big, I mean, I think you have an initial vision, but then that changes for any number of reasons. As you start I've said this before, interrogate what you're doing, right? Like what sounds is a good idea on an outline. When you really start to try to put scenes together, you're like, all right, maybe this isn't where we want to go. And you have time in a writer's room over the weeks that we had to kind of, prune ideas that weren't working or course, adjust or course correct. So, I think most of our kind of ideas made it through to the end, right? But I wouldn't say that they were gospel from where we started. And I think that's just the nature of any show like this. And you got a lot of very bright people with a lot of very good opinions. And I think everyone's trying to make the best show. And unlike my novels, where I just sit in a room by myself and write a book and say this is the book, that TV is a collaborative process, and there's a lot of collaborating going on. So I
Was that
think. Go ahead.
was that frustrating? I mean, because I mean, I haven't been in a TV room, so I've always done, and the most I've collaborated on is with writing partners on projects, but I haven't done that level. So it feels like it would be so hard to sit, especially when you objectively have probably a lot of experience. I mean, if it's anything like Yellowstone, there's a lot of, criminal elements that are swirling around. So you might be sitting on a little bit more experience in terms of like the actual plotting that could happen. I mean,
Yeah, well, I don't find it. I didn't find it frustrating. I think that I approached it with kind of two ideas in mind. One is that it's not my show. It's the showrunner's vision in collaboration with the significant lead actors that we had, as well as the studio, the platform, right? So it's their show. So even if it's not how I would tell the story, left to my own devices, that's okay. That's not what I'm there for, right? I'm there to tell the story that the showrunner, it's his voice, and so that's the first thing I always kept in mind. Not my show. And the second thing I kept in mind is not my show. And so as long as you keep those two things in mind, then you can put your ego or opinions aside. My what I tried to do in the room was, because you're there with very good writers. Everybody's a good writer, or they're not sitting there, right? And they're all, in this extent, a writer's room's no different than a bunch of cops, right? They're all very good at their job. They're all type A personalities, and everybody wants, their ideas to kind of win out. And I tried very much to pitch it once, pitch it twice, and then let it go. And and over the course of a room, I guess kind of pitch it once, defend it once, and then let it go, right? And over the course of the room, ultimately, you'd like to think the best idea wins out, and that's what you have a writer's room for. It doesn't have to be my idea; it just has to be the best idea. And so that requires you to kind of take a back seat at times, and kind of understand that that's the collaborative process. So it's not frustrating; it's just different. And I think the best people in the room understand that. And then I also, had two other advantages. One is I have my own novels. So if I really wanted to tell a story a certain way, well, I'll just go write a book. I could do that. So, so there was no hill I was going to die on in the writer's room over anything, right? And then because I came at this late in life, like, I was a little older, I had this whole other career beforehand, then I just wanted to be a good partner and a good collaborator and a good writer and a good friend, right? Nothing in that room or any room would be something that I would want to get angry or upset or agitated about, or try not to. So, I just wanted to be that guy that people, could lean on, rely on. They'd get my best opinion. And if my opinion wasn't the one that won out, well, then we just move on to the next thing. So,
all I want to do is ask you about the plot.
no, you can't do that. And again, a lot of that stuff, changed throughout the time we were writing it. And then, now that as they get into post production, they'll be editing and stuff. And so, like, I couldn't even, as I sit here now, tell you exactly what every episode looks like. I know what we wrote. I know a lot of what got filmed, but I don't know ultimately myself exactly the texture of what everything is going to look like until I see it like everyone else, and that's exciting.
Was it fun taking it down to Texas?
Oh
As
yeah, yeah,
because
it was fun.
they dipped down there a couple times, but now you really kind of planted a flag as a new era down there.
Yes, yeah, and so that unshackled a little bit, I think, just from storytelling, or it gave us some kind of new avenues to pursue. And Chad, the showrunner, is a Texan, so fortunately, it aligned with a lot of stuff that he already knew, and areas that he knew, and stuff he felt comfortable writing about. And I had lived in Texas. I had lived in El Paso, Texas, for several years, and then covered the kind of southwestish Texas area that we somewhat touch a little kind of address in Dutton Ranch. So I was not unfamiliar with many of the regions that we were kind of writing and talking about, or the
So,
terrain that we were
did
writing and talking about.
did you have to have a certain amount of this is gonna sound really weird, but I'm like the only thing I can think of calling it is horse porn, where it's like a certain number, like certain minutes of every episode of Yellowstone is seeing Taylor Sheridan rope a horse or cattle from a horse, and like showing like dressage and the backward horse and the sideways horse, like the
Right.
the the um the rodeo-esque part of it. It feels like it's like there's a prerequisite in order to
Well, I
fulfill
don't know. There's not a there's
the
not a
tractor
prerequisite.
commercial mandate.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. There was no prerequisite, and we definitely didn't get any sort of mandates like, oh, we have to have
Yeah.
10 minutes of
Yeah.
people riding horses around. But I think you do a disservice to the people who love the show if you don't include some of that, because I think that's and we all love that. Look, I don't know anything about riding. I know a lot more about riding horses now, but before that, I didn't know much.
Did they
But
did they put you on a horse for like just
oh,
I know like
I had been on horses before, so
oh
but I'm not a horse man. But we got to spend a lot of time with wranglers, these guys who really do this, for a living. And I learned a ton about cattle ranching and horses, and we had great real cattle ranchers who we could call on at a moment's notice, and cowboys we could call on at a moment's notice to kind of, and we had a couple of the riders in the room who had grown up on ranches and who had that real life experience. So that's in the show because I think everybody in there loves that stuff too. And when you work with people who love that stuff, then it's easy to find room for it, and it's organic to that world. It wouldn't be a Yellowstone show if it not on horseback. And I think I've watched a little bit of Marshall's. Somehow they find a way to get Casey up on a horse too, in those episodes. And I personally don't know many marshals who are riding horses grabbing people, but look, it works for the fiction of the show, and it works for the fans, and that's what we're doing it all for anyway.
I mean, I know if there's a Yellowstone New York spinoff, Manhattan, they're gonna be the mounted cops that go through Central Park. That's gonna be
Right. Absolutely. And that's fine. That's the fun of it, and that's the love of it, and I think that's why that stuff has resonated with people.
yeah.
It's a slice of America that not everyone knows, and it's attractive. I mean,
Oh, I mean, it's why I watch every single episode of that show. I'm like, I
yeah.
love
I
it.
mean,
So
a horse running through a field is pretty, right? And it can be filmed beautifully, and we had great, directors and cinematographers and whatnot. So, that's part of the beauty of the show, is the beauty of the animals and the land. And I think I think we captured that in Dutton Ranch. Obviously, it's not Montana, right? It's not that, but I think what we captured in Texas is going to be just as beautiful in its own way. I think it's going to have a unique look, and yet still be part of the Yellowstone universe in a very relatable, knowable way. We'll see. I guess we'll find out in May when it comes out.
okay, one spoiler if you could, does Kevin Costner come back?
Well,
He
if he
wasn't
did,
dead. He was never dead all along.
all right. All right. Well, if he did, I would be the last person on earth that would be allowed or have any sense to tell you. But
I'm
I
surprised he's not begging to be let back on the show.
I can say that the actors that are on the show, Ed Harris, Annette Bening,
Damn.
they're fantastic actors, and they were great to work with on the times that I got to say hello to them or spend time with them, and as well as Jai Courtney and a ton of others. I'm going to leave out most of them, but they were all great, and they were all legitimately excited. I thought to be doing this show, and to see them say your words on
That's what I
screen.
was gonna say. Oh my God, to have those icons God, what an like it's a dream come true.
All right.
Oh, well, I can't wait for it. Are you work? So are
Well,
you working on another novel then right now? Is
I
that
am working on another. I'm always working on another novel, and I just turned over the first third of it to my agent to take a look at, take her temperature on. I don't always do that, but I was kind of did that now because I'm always writing a novel, but this screenwriting thing is kind of a thing I'm doing, and so I'm now finding that it's difficult to do both at the speed at which I was doing. Like last year when I was out in LA working on Dutton Ranch, a show like that kind of takes a ton of time. It sucks all the oxygen out of your life, really. And I was trying to finish a book too then, and I was back to writing kind of 7 days a week, which I was kind of wanting not to do. And so I'm taking this book a little slower, with the idea that I might be balancing it against another show or something else. And so I'm kind of in this weird period where I'm now a full time writer, and I'm trying to figure out what full time writers do.
Well, and then I assume again it's a big assume. Like I would think with your experience, you could go out with one of your own books to turn it into a TV show.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that we're talking about. I mean, I've written a pilot of one of my own books, a pilot adaptation. I recently finished a feature that I think we're gonna kind of shop around. Uh, co-writer sold a feature last year, which I think some movement is happening on that. So, that's all good stuff. But it's all kind of stuff that's balls in the air, right? You don't know when any of them are going to land. And that's the part of this. I was a federal agent for all those years, and you got to, you kind of knew what your day was like. They were long, right? And but you went to work and kind of did kind of the standard thing, and every 2 weeks you got paid, and then now I'm in this kind of weird quasi existence where you're doing a lot of things, and some of them go, and some of them don't, and it's kind of a whole different existence than what I was used to.
Oh, I know it's like it's that's the exhausting part in LA. You're not really working unless you have five things going because maybe one of those will go every 10 years or move to another.
Yeah,
So it's like
my parents ask me, they're like, "Well, what do you do all day?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I kind of do this and that. I write a book and I write a screenplay, and you're just always doing something. But you never know when any of that's gonna kind of be the next big thing. And so, I'm fine with that. I've said I'm fortunate. This is my second career. I had a whole other career before this, and so if it all fell apart tomorrow and no one wanted me to do anything, well, I could just hang out, watch my dog, and go quietly into the night. But I love creating, and I love doing this stuff. So I want as many opportunities to keep doing it as I can. But I also realize it's a tough industry in the best of times, and this isn't like one of the best of times. And I got my opportunities kind of at the height of the streaming wars, when a novelist like myself would be given an opportunity to work, because they were running 500 or 600 scripted shows a year, whatever it was, and they needed writers. I know that a novelist like myself would struggle to break in now, because everyone's struggling to break in, even people who've been out here and worked on a lot of shows. There's just not the same number of shows. There's not the same number of opportunities. So I don't take anything that has happened for granted, um, and I don't take any of it as given. Right? No matter what I've worked on, that doesn't mean I'm going to work on anything else. That's just, I think, where the nature of the business is. Yeah, I think you have to be adaptable and flexible. And I'm teaching a writing course next week at a conference, and I don't know I'm the best person to teach anyone anything, but it's an opportunity that came up, and it's kind of unique, and so I'll give it a try. And I'm reading some folks' works, and I'm going to be sitting down and critiquing their works, and those are the sorts of things you kind of do while you're developing your next thing. And that's what I tell my parents. They're like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm developing." And they're like, what does that mean? I said, I'm developing something, right? I'm creating something. The only thing at the end of the day that you can control is the writing. That is it, right? Nothing else is within your control in the publishing industry, and that feels true on the screenwriting industry. And it's a good thing that I love the writing itself, right? Because I don't understand the business much, and if I understood it, it might frustrate me more, right? So there's kind of ignorance is bliss a little bit. But I tell people, if you're going to do any creative endeavor, just control those things that you can control. If it's music, you can only control the songs that you write or play. If it's sculpting, you can only control that. If it's writing, you can only control the writing. So just focus on that. And I would be writing whether anyone's reading my stuff or not. I mean, that's just kind of what I do now. It's how I react or interact with the world, right? I write. And so I would do it whether anyone was publishing me or paying me to come write on a TV show. And so knowing that that's all I can control, and then the rest of it, I just kind of like let go. I'm going to write, I'll write this next book. If someone wants to publish it, great. If they don't, I'll put it in a drawer. I've done it before, and I'll just move on to the next book. I'll do the same thing with the next screenplay. And if a TV show comes up, somebody wants me to work on it, great. If they don't, well, I'll just go develop something else, right? I'm always going to be creating and always going to be writing.
You don't have to put it in a drawer anymore. You could just do a Substack.
I can do a Substack, and it's interesting because I do that Substack stuff and a little bit of social media, but I'm really bad at it. And I don't know how much that moves the needle. For some people, it works, but I don't really want to monetize my Substack or anything. Like, I don't want to be a content person or any of that. I want to create things. But I don't want to create content, I guess, if that's what you call it.
Yeah, that's the frustrating thing. As a creator now, it's not what you're creating, but how you are able to present it that matters now. Sometimes it feels like that, oh, cool, you wrote a book. Yeah, but do you have a platform?
Right.
That's the book doesn't matter, but the content that you create to promote something. So it's like this beast of a machine that we're sort of told now the whole world relies on with.
Particularly in publishing, right? That having a platform and having followers and being involved in social media. I mean, that the traditional outlets for getting a book reviewed or getting some sort of attention for your book or the typical marketing and publicity launches, a lot of that's gone, or it's very, very, very limited, right? I used to go on book tours. I mean, those sort of book tours don't happen as frequently anymore, right? It's just that's the whole industry is contracted. And I'm not sure they sold books anyway, but it was kind of the package, the general package that you got. And, publishers really want you to kind of hustle on your own to move your books. And that's worked for some authors, and I know them, and I really respect their willingness to kind of do that. But I'm not going to do that, right? I'll put up an Instagram post, and I try very much to support other authors that way. And I don't talk as much about my own stuff, talk about everyone else's stuff. And people only care if I put up a picture of a dog or bourbon anyway. I mean, most that tends to register more than anything else. But, I definitely support other authors because I believe in that. But, I'm just not going to spend a ton of time every day when I could be writing the next book or could be writing the next screenplay or developing the next thing. I'm not going to spend a ton of time trying to put a great post on Instagram or write a ton of a daily Substack thing or whatever, and that's just a choice that I've made. But I respect others who choose to do it differently.
Oh, man, I feel like if only if I maybe I should just start doing that and just go screw it, just dogs and bourbon. That's it for the rest.
Look, that's a pretty good life.
It's a good combo. You're in Kentucky, so
it is a good, yeah. And so the bourbon's easy to come by. I built a little bourbon bar in my basement downstairs, and I got 103 bottles down there, and bar height tables and a pinball machine and everything else. So it's great to go down there to drink. And we recently. We had dogs for several years, and they passed away about a year and a half ago. I'm pretty convinced we weren't going to get any more because of the travel from work and that sort of thing. but my wife decided, well, she wanted to foster a dog, and because she volunteers at one of our shelters here in the county. So we fostered this dog, and we he was going to actually be adopted by somebody else, and then my wife's like, screw that, I want this dog, I don't care about those people, we're just going to keep him. And so he was set to go to these other people, and she snatched him back from under him. So we have successfully fostered
Cue one of
zero
your
dogs.
crime novels.
Right. We've successfully fostered zero dogs.
Yeah.
Right. The one dog that we fostered is now our dog. And it's funny. My wife said, I don't care if I'm a bad person, they can't keep our dog. And I'm like, he wasn't our dog. And but she didn't hear reason on that. So he now is our dog. But Bourbon and Dogs, you put that up on your Substack or Instagram, and people love that stuff. I appreciate you having me on as one of your first guests on this thing. And, I love talking about this work that we do, that I have been very fortunate to have the chance to do. So.
Oh, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. It was really fun.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Well, it's over now. Get your keister on down the road. Okay, well, what you waiting for? Nothing left to hear. Go on now. Get